Hello everybody. What you can see there on the screen is the chart of Jeffry Epstein, and I'm also going to be looking at the chart of Ghislaine Maxwell in this vlog. Now this is the astrology section where you'll get to see the charts, the aspects, and also the synastry between these two charts, which gives us some clues as to where the truth lie. And then there'll be a live where we'll all interact and where I'm going to chat in detail, giving you a whole host of information gleaned from different sources about the Maxwell family, which is Mossad through and through, about Jeffry Epstein, bringing in Leslie Wexner and his connections, tying it all together and giving you a 3D version of exactly what's going on here. So it'll help you make sense of it, help you kind of make up your own minds about what you think the potentials are for the situation with Ghislaine Maxwell, right? It's intriguing. Yes, there's the potential for heads to roll, for something really exciting to happen, for justice to be done. But what we want to look at in these charts is, will Ghislaine have the same fate as Jeffry Epstein and her father? Will she get off lightly? I mean, what is likely to play out here? And hopefully with the insight of astrology, we'll get some clues. So Jeffry Epstein is just an Aquarius because he's born on the 20th of January 1953, or he was born in Brooklyn. This is his chart here. We're going to be having a little discussion about the ins and outs of it. So, what do we see here first? Well, just in terms of his death, what you can see there is solar arc Pluto in the yellow. And you can see at the time of his death, it was squaring his sun pretty much exactly there. So Pluto, first degree of Scorpio, or not Scorpio, squaring his sun at Naught Aquarius when he died, was killed, topped, and I will come more to that. That's really interesting because Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, had that exact same aspect when he passed, right? Then what about transiting Pluto? Well, I haven't got it drawn in, but if you look at the sun there, or you look at Mercury there in Capricorn, transiting Pluto was conjunct Mercury in Capricorn. So here we have Pluto, the planet of death, acting again, which is quite important. Other aspects at the time, there you go into the circle, is his Mars conjunct Venus in Pisces, which was activated by transiting Neptune at the time. And Neptune is badly aspected, conjunct Saturn, square the Sun at birth. Therefore, Neptune having a negative influence. Also, Neptune, key to all this mystery and the chaos surrounding his death, videos not working, God's not being there, the fact that, it's not clear, far from clear. I'm sure a lot of us suspect he was killed, given all the breaks in his neck, which wouldn't be possible to do to yourself, as I once went through in a previous vlog. But there, Neptune just gives you the mystery of the whole situation, right? What's interesting is at his death, he had solar arc Jupiter, which we see down here in the yellow in Cancer, opposite Mercury. So he had two major planets interacting with Mercury, so which leads me to believe Mercury may be a chart ruler. Please ignore the Taurian ascendant here because I do not know his birth time. So I'm wondering if Mercury, maybe his ascendant, maybe he's Virgo rising. I doubt he's Gemini rising because Virginia Giuffre said he was kind of a bit of a bore, he was socially awkward. This doesn't sound like Gemini rising. She said Ghislaine was the confident sort of party animal one, right? And she was the socialite who had to draw him in and create the entertainment. He alone was boring. So possibly he had an Earth rising like Taurus, but he could have had Virgo rising, hence why the aspect here of Jupiter to Mercury opposing had an influence in his death. However, the interesting thing is Jupiter in Ghislaine's chart is also by solar arc squaring Mercury. So that's a similarity in both their charts at the moment, is Jupiter affecting Mercury. It could mean Jupiter, the law, catching up with them, incarceration, court cases, all that sort of thing. Certainly that plays in. Also Mars, here you see Mars in Taurus, was squaring his Pluto in Leo at the time of death. Now that certainly plays into the theme because Mars, the planet of violence, Pluto, the planet of death. Usually Mars, Pluto together can represent some sort of fatality, a fatal accident, or death coming to you. So that's interesting. Now let's just look at his chart, because what I spotted immediately is this Venus conjunct Mars in Pisces. Venus conjunct Mars gives a high sex drive, especially when you see there it's sextile Jupiter. Jupiter there in Taurus, which is also a very sexual placement for Jupiter. And those two definitely excessive sexual need, sexual desire, and insatiable sexuality going on there. I think Virginia Giuffre in Filthy Rich says how he couldn't do a 2-hour plane ride without some form of stimulation, intimate stimulation going on. I mean, he was just addicted. That's why to say that he was also a billionaire and he was juggling all these balls financially and intellectually and hobnobbing with all these elites and being so interested in science. I don't know how interested in science you can really get when your concentration is so short because you're a sex addict, you know. So anyway, that's interesting. But he has this in common with Ghislaine, because as you can see here is Ghislaine's chart with the Gemini Ascendant, and there in Sagittarius she's got Venus conjunct Mars. So they both share this intense sexuality, love of sex, love of pleasures of the body, an intense desire for fun, socializing, being with other people, being with people of the opposite sex. So they have that in common, and Prince Andrew has that aspect as well. So that's common to all three of them. The fact that it's in Pisces also indicates to me a lot of a very strong fantasy life. And as you can see, the Venus conjunct Mars is also there trying to Uranus in Cancer. So sexually very experimental as well. It's not just that there's a high sex drive, it's that it's eccentric, it's novel. As we know, it's sick. But having just looked at the chart, I would have definitely said this is a person, had I not known him, that's certainly into extreme sex. Very experimental, possibly on the edges. Okay, let's have another little talk about Jeffry. So he's got Moon in Aries, as you can see there, and that Moon in Aries is triggered by some planets in Ghislaine's chart. It's a 10 degrees Aries, and it's triggered by Ghislaine's Mercury and her Sun. I think Ghislaine understood his very selfish desires, that he was extremely sexual, he was very impulsive, he was willful, he was very headstrong, he was quite a fiery character. She tapped into that and probably manipulated him through it. I think she understood his emotional nature very well because of her placement of Mercury square that, and I think that's why she was able to manipulate him emotionally, and she sort of honed in on him as being the perfect one to fulfill the purpose for him, and he certainly has an intense very intense personality. And again, this Mars in Aries is someone who's a fiery person, got a lot of desire, goes after what he wants, a very demanding person, huge sense of entitlement within him as well, which you'll also see with her, but also a degree of naivete. So perhaps he wasn't quite sure what he was being drawn into initially. Very interesting is the fact that his Sun is square Saturn Neptune. Always interested in Saturn Neptune because it's present in people who get assassinated. John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, Benazir Bhutto, and Indira Gandhi all had Saturn conjunct Neptune. They were all assassinated. So again, the theme of assassination. It's kind of a morbid combination when those two planets are together. Now, if you have those two planets in your chart, don't worry, because unless it's strongly connected to the Sun or a midheaven or an ascendant, then it doesn't usually indicate any form of assassination. But it usually indicates something a little bit strange or a little bit morbid. It's a serious affliction in any chart. But it's quite interesting because it also says something about the spy world. Because Saturn being so strongly the establishment, being in Libra, law and order, but Neptune's the shady, murky, undercover, secretive side. So when you've got them together, it says everything you need to know about spying. Spying is all about the establishment, but it's the underbelly, the secret side, the subversive side of the establishment. It's also strongly linked to science, and we know he had this connection via, I think it was Wexner, who gave him the money to make all these donations to Harvard. He was incredibly interested in what was going on in Harvard, what was going on in science, and there's a big question mark over what exactly was going on at his Santa Fe ranch, because Virginia Giuffre was talked of, the last straw for her was that they were asking her to bear a child, and then the child sort of going to be given away to be possibly experimented on. Again, the comparisons with Mengele. What was going on at that ranch? Was it cloning experiments? Was it... I have my own theories, by the way, on this, and I plan to go into it in detail, in another vlog. But what was going on there? He certainly had a connection to science, and then that's definitely shown by that aspect. So I think, it's conceivable that this wasn't a nonsense. And also with his here Mercury in Capricorn opposite Uranus, he certainly had a mind for scientific things. I doubt he was bad at maths. I think he was probably very talented in maths, because often Mercury opposite Uranus gives a bit of genius, a great mind for scientific and mathematical things, an ability to think laterally. So he probably did have a mind to take on vast amounts of information, but I do think his concentration span was very, very short. So he probably wanted it in small doses. But I think this whole thing about his scientific interests is accurate, and he was definitely developing something on the scientific side. I will touch on that in my more gossipy live that I want to do. What else is this Saturn Neptune thing? It's linked to professional activity behind the scenes. And as we know, I mean, before he was more widely known what he was doing, he was a very kind of mythical figure. Everyone knew he was a billionaire. No one really knew what he was doing. No one knew really how he made his money. There's no paper trail. There's this presence, but it's no one really understands it. No one knows what it is. So definitely this professional activity taking place behind the scenes. Saturn Neptune is often linked to foul play. So there's foul play in his death, but there's also foul play in the way he was living his life. So foul play, organized crime is very much linked to that aspect. It's also sometimes linked to a morbid imagination. I think he had a very depressed, sick side. I think he was probably turned on by things that were particularly macabre or gross. And it also is indicative of destructive psychic influences. So, as we know, these people hang around with the likes of the Marina Abramoviches, and indeed Ghislaine Maxwell's one of her sister was married to someone who was connected to Jack Parsons, who was a partner of Aleister Crowley. So when you look at the elites, you've always got these witched and wizardy people hanging around them and doing these occult practices. And Jeffry Epstein was definitely involved in that, but that was bad for him. It was unlucky for him. It played badly into his psychology, and it was probably a depressing influence for him, and it did him no good. People with that aspect can often be institutionalized, like he eventually was in prison, and he did spend a short time in kind of sort of prison, but as we know, the prison guards were escorting him all over every day because he was still allowed to carry on his work because he had such a sweetheart deal, and he was in a special wing of the prison with his own guards. Note, his own guards. So obviously he was worried about being taken out back then as well. As I said, also indicates some entanglement in the occult. So just to recap, we've got this Jupiter in Taurus, these intense sexual desires, but also intense materialism and desire for money and a certain amount of luck with money. Money tends to come to those with Jupiter in Taurus, especially when it's linked to the planet Venus. And as we see there, also Mercury being square that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, indicating again the interest in science, as of course epitomized by that link to Uranus. So a lot going on there about science and the whole shebang. So let's have a look at some of the aspects. Now, Ghislaine's Saturn, it's very interesting. Let's look at where her Saturn is. So her Saturn, there's 29 degrees of Capricorn. You can see it. It's in the green. If we go back to Jeffry Epstein's chart, you see that her Saturn is conjunct his Sun, which is on 0 degrees of Aquarius. It's a very tight conjunction. So many people said, well, is Jeffry Epstein the head of the snake? Is this his operation? Other people say Ghislaine was his handler. I say that's correct. From this aspect, she's his boss. She's in control of him. It seems that she was dating him. Her father saw his potential, and then he was kind of recruited in the whole Mossad thing. She was running the show. She was higher up. She was the specialist. She was the trained agent. He was just an employee, basically. And I think that's true, judging by that aspect there. I talked already about her Mercury and Sun being square his moon in Aries, and how that could have led to her kind of controlling him emotionally. Her Jupiter is conjunct his North Node. So her Jupiter is in Aquarius on 10 degrees, and his North Node there is 12 degrees of Aquarius. I think that indicates that almost she was a lucky charm for him for a certain time. She introduced him to a world that was big, she expanded his horizons enormously. She propelled him to a kind of social position, as indicated by Jupiter, that would have been unimaginable if he hadn't have known her. So there, she was key to the trajectory that his life followed, and to the position he held in society, being able talks his people from Harvard and, hobnob with the Bill Clintons of the world. That was all her doing. So this little conjunction of his there in Pisces, that's the Venus-Mars, it's connected by a square to her Pluto in Virgo. It's actually in opposition because she's got Pluto down here in Virgo, which you can't see, but I'll show you now. If we just hop over to her chart, you can see there her Pluto is in Virgo, and it's squaring this aspect. So her Pluto, her intense desires, her manipulation ability, it's squaring that sexual thing. So you see again the intense passion between them, but that she's manipulating him via it, because again, Pluto, she's in control. She's using these desires of him to propel him into a position that's going to fulfill the purpose that she has or her superiors have. So again, there we have this control. Strong element of her controlling him by virtue of that position of Pluto. And we also have yes, this aspect of his there, the Venus-Mars is square her ascendant. So again, the sort of sexual bond between them, the sexual pleasure that they share together, as we know in a very sick way, that she was aiding and abetting his kind of sexual desires, drawing the girls in, etc., etc. That's linked. So, sex is something that ties them together very heavily. If he hadn't have had this interest in this kind of kinky sex and everything, then this whole thing would have fallen apart. Because her Saturn is conjunct her Sun, it also means her Saturn is square this aspect, the Neptune-Saturn conjunction, which, as I say, is connected to organized crime, the underworld, this professional activity that's undercover, and the spy world. So I think that gives us quite a nice picture of how they kind of meld in together. Let's go over to Ghislaine's chart. Now, there you go. I'm not so sure how accurate that Gemini rising is, but it was from the Astrology website. I'm not going to be heavily reliant on this Gemini rising, although I think it fits her, because George Monbiot, who apparently met her at Cambridge or Oxford, was one of the Oxford she went to, and he said that the exterior was bubbly, delightful, charming, very friendly, but there was a void underneath. But basically, I think you could say that about anyone that goes to Oxbridge. It's a networking opportunity for globalists, isn't it? I'd say it's quite common among people in Oxford and Cambridge. Judging by the Inspector Morse series, I'd say that's not uncommon. So, but anyway, it would fit, because we know that she's very sociable. I mean, she's always there being photographed with all the in people. She pushes herself forward. She's got great verbal skills. She's talkative. She's amusing. She's quite witty. Yeah, So it does sort of fit Gemini rising. Okay, let's see what else. Now, she has, interesting, Moon in Leo, right? She's supposed to be the youngest child of the 9 children of Robert Maxwell and the favorite child. I'd say that certainly fits Moon in Leo. That usually is a child who's brought up with a sense of entitlement, apple of the parents' eyes, getting loads and loads of attention, brought up with a feeling of specialness, of uniqueness, of feeling they've got a special place in the world. And this is amplified because, as you can see, it's opposite Jupiter there in Aquarius. So that absolutely amplifies her confidence in herself. But there's something here that's a little bit more complicated, because Neptune is in the mix. So Moon, square Neptune, there you can see it in turquoise in Scorpio, is square Jupiter. Right. This adds a different flavor. So I'm feeling there's damage here. Moon opposite Jupiter is also a lot about mood swings. People who can be bipolar, people who can have extreme rages, and who are often dependent on some kind of medication or alcohol. But the fact that Neptune is involved here says to me narcissism. Now, as you know from watching my vlogs, I'm not one to scream narcissist at people, because I feel it's an overused and inappropriately used term in many, many cases. But this is definitely what I've seen before in the charts of narcissists, is this particular combination. It's highly likely Robert Maxwell, her father, was a narcissist, and narcissists usually damage their children. So in a way, she is a victim, which is shown by Moon square Neptune, but she does have free will, so we can't feel sorry for her. But she's certainly is a victim, and I think she could have become a narcissist, bearing in mind his influence on her and what happened to her, because usually a child with Moon square Neptune is somewhat manipulated and somewhat neglected. So although she's very, very spoilt in many ways, there's also some neediness and an immense amount of neglect. So I think that complicates her personality. But when I say narcissistic tendencies, this sort of combination says to me that there's a total lack of awareness which leads to no shame, which allows her to do these terrible things and not evaluate herself. You also see here ruthlessness, because Moon in Leo, opposite Jupiter in Aquarius, is so entitled. They'll virtually do anything because they just feel above other people. They think they're always right. They think they are more special, more gifted, more talented than others, and therefore have a better, more of a right to others. There's a distortion of equality with these people. They just think they're more equal than others. Absolutely. There's no empathy. Now, often Moon square Jupiter can mean a huge amount of empathy, but when you throw in Moon square Neptune, it can mean a huge amount of empathy. These could be people who become, nurses, Florence Nightingales, healers, but on the other hand, it can go totally the other way to someone who has no empathy and can just abuse and ride roughshod of others with no conscience. There's the extreme mood swings, so I'm sure she was prone to vile tempers, vile depressions, and look, he's a depressive as well, so they both two real depressives who probably did engage in some form of mixing drugs, alcohol, and prescription drugs together to deal with this terrible depression they both went through, and then maybe all these sexual sick fantasies were a way of getting out of depression, because they both got problems. She's able to terrorize others. As you can see, she gaslighted these girls. She drew them in. They were intimidated. She's very good at spotting a victim. Just because she's got this Moon square Neptune, she understands victims. She is certainly a sort of victim in her own way. That's why she understands damaged people. She can identify a victim. She knows how to communicate with victims, control them, manipulate them, and certainly gaslight them and put them in a corner where they suffer from learned helplessness, which is what narcissists are very good in creating to others. But she can also be very charming and charismatic, because there we've got the Venus conjunct Mars in Sagittarius. So when Virginia Giuffre talks about how she was fantastic when she first met her, she was such a friendly lady and all that, certainly true. She has got an extremely bubbly, adventurous, friendly side. And I believe that Sean Atwood has had on a friend, is it Laura Goldstein, a friend of Ghislaine, who said she won't say a word against her. She's been a great friend to her. She's going to fight her corner, blah, blah, blah. So she does have her friends, and I don't think that's impossible, because, there is a side of her character that can develop strong friendships and possibly even be a good friend, right? Okay, so we've talked about Moon in Leo, daddy's girl, favorite child, spoilt, entitled, but she does have this neediness. She's got bad judgment. Well, I suppose I'm preaching to the converted there, right? She's certainly here. You've got their Sun conjunct Mars, Venus. She's got a great deal of energy. She's got a certain amount of charisma, very sociable. People would be inspired by her sense of adventure. She's daring, likable, very full of herself and arrogant. Look at all these planets in Capricorn. That definitely indicates willfulness, great determination, certain ruthlessness, materialistic, absolutely status driven, and very, very demanding. Extremely demanding character. Gets what she damn well wants. However, look, Mercury conjunct Sun in Capricorn, which is trine this Pluto-Uranus conjunction. Well, it's a very wide conjunction in Virgo, but Mercury is trine Uranus. He had Mercury opposite Uranus, so she is smart. She's very technically minded as well, so good with scientific things. She's adaptable, very modern in her outlook, change orientated. She's dynamic. She's very, very versatile. I would say that she had an extremely high level of training. She was a very skilled operative. We know that she flew a helicopter, and she also flew a submarine. Now, I don't know about you guys, but you can enroll in helicopter and flight lessons down at the local flight center. But I don't know anywhere where you can enroll at learning to steer a submarine, right? So obviously this is a lady who's connected to the military, because how else are you going to have access to a submarine to learn it? And if you're not actually in the Navy, how the heck would you learn to steer a submarine? And some people say there was a secret underground port on Lolita Island that could accept a submarine. Okay, you wonder, but I mean, anything could be possible, right? So I think we're talking here about a person who's not only a skilled operative, but also possibly someone who's initiated in the occult and dark arts, because this Pluto conjunction with Uranus trining Sun Mercury, I think there's definitely an indication, also with Moon down here in the fourth house, I think there's an indication that she was initiated. Plus, as you can see, Sun Mercury is in the 8th house of mysteries, of the occult, of secrets and whatever. So, yes. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if she'd had contact with old Abramovich at some point. But there certainly is psychological issues, and I'd say she suffered from a large amount of paranoia as well. So she certainly covered her back all the time. She's been paranoid all this time. Definitely a very insincere, potentially, because she is such an emotional chameleon. You would never know what she was really feeling. This makes her very untrustworthy, certainly a snake. I think to a degree she's always felt an outcast, and she's been looking to belong. So while this exterior was someone who was fitting in high society, inside she was never really feeling like that. She always felt really an outcast. But she's a very cunning person, a great level of manipulative ability, cunning, secretive ability, but also clever and has a great wit about her. So she's been able to disguise these nefarious things because she has got that fun-loving, witty side, you know. She's a person with great stamina. She appears very open-minded, and again, there, you know, she's kinky, right? She's kinky because here we've got, again, similar to Epstein, we've got this, the Venus-Mars conjunction linked to Uranus, which is, you know, the kinky planet, especially when it's in Virgo, right? Very sexually experimentational, likes things that are a bit out there. Obviously, we know, far too out there for any decent person to consider. Also got here the planet Mars square Uranus. I mean, she's ingenious, very innovative, extremely organized person, certainly technically competent, which is why she would be able to operate a submarine or helicopter. I believe these things about her because seeing, you know, chart there, she probably trained in kind of cyber things as well. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, all her sisters are involved in Silicon Valley, aren't they? Well, the twin sisters involved in Silicon Valley, certainly, and technical development and whatnot. Her Saturn here is unaspected, indicating a lack of control, and certainly Moon in fire opposite Jupiter is a total lack of self-restraint and a lack of self-control. You can see Saturn, this moral compass, was totally missing because there's no Saturn, there's no wisdom, there's no seeing into the future, there's no sense of obligation or anything to others. So let us talk about some of her aspects right now. The most remarkable thing is she's having a Saturn return. So her Saturn transiting has returned to this position because Saturn right now is 0 degrees of Aquarius. So she's had a Saturn return. I'd say why this is remarkable is for Skripal. He had a Saturn return when that thing was going on in Salisbury. We don't really know what's happened to him. I plan to do a vlog on it. But Saturn return is usually live by the sword, die by the sword. It's usually when you're getting your comeuppance, when everything you've done wrong returns to you and you have to face the music, which I'd say is exactly what's happening now. So whatever happens to her, there is a certain degree that her former life is over, because Saturn returns often indicate retirement. They're part of a 30-year cycle, and as we know, this thing with Epstein was probably going on for about 30 years. It's ended now. So we see the end of this reign of terror, of this 30-year cycle of abuse, which has been continuing, obviously, even after Epstein came out of jail, or she was apparently not speaking to him. I think it's been continuing, but you do see at the closing of a chapter there with that Saturn conjunction. We've got transiting Neptune is going to be squaring this thing with Venus and Mars in a few years' time, which suggests some other important event in about 4 years' time. Maybe that's her release from prison or something, you know. We are speculating there to see. So her solar arc Mars is conjunct Uranus at the moment. Uranus there, you know, being sort of in the 4th house. So does this indicate, you know, a total change in her living arrangements and her lifestyle, estrangement from everything she's known. Uranus in the 4th definitely represents ending, so end of an era for her. Mars, Uranus, sometimes, yeah, sudden violence possibly, but Uranus is fairly nicely aspected by trine, so I don't think we can read too much into that. Similar to Jeffry, she's got the solar arc Jupiter square her Mercury. That indicates legal proceedings. I think that also indicates that a lot of money will come in behind her. She'll call in favors, and a lot of influential people, represented by Jupiter, will help her in the struggle financially, help her to fund her legal expenses and all that. Now, they say that she was in France. Then she was arrested in New Hampshire at this estate that she purchased. It's a massive estate. It's hundreds of acres, and she purchased it for $1 million cash. Sorry, that cost more than $1 million. That's fake news. There's no way that only cost $1 million. So obviously someone's helping her out financially, right? And she had $1 million cash. Okay, someone was helping her move that around. There's money laundering involved. And why did she could have stayed in France where there's no extradition, because isn't that why Roman Polanski's out there in France? So she could have stayed there, no extradition. So I'm liable to believe, because Jupiter's involved here, there's a certain amount of luck, calling in favors, that she's using her influence, that she's maybe already negotiated a deal, therefore this wasn't an arrest, she was handing herself over. As you know, we haven't seen any mugshots or anything like that. So maybe it's a cozy arrangement where she's already done a deal. That would seem to indicate. Is she going to name names? I don't know. Probably not, because if she's done a deal, why would they do a deal with her if the higher-ups are going to, their heads are going to roll, whatever. We also see Saturn is square Mars. Saturn solar arc is square Mars. Here you've got Mars here in the 7th house. 7th house is also legal battles. Mars in the 7th does often indicate some sort of a violence towards a person from an enemy. Right, so there is a small indication there that someone might, but it's a small indication. I don't really have enough in the chart to back it up, so it's only a small indication of violence towards her. I mean, not necessarily small, but it's an indication. Jeffry Epstein also had his Mars activated when he died, but it was by Neptune, and as you know, Neptune was badly connected to Saturn in the chart, so that figured. We've also got her solar arc Uranus squaring her Saturn. So once again, it's squaring her Saturn in the 9th house, indicating all these legal affairs that are coming. And there will be some, it's not going to be plain sailing. I mean, there's going to be some real surprises to her in this legal thing. I think the other side is getting stronger. That's our side, the side that wants to see all these people, including the Clintons, brought down. I think it's going to be a struggle to kind of eke her out of it, because I do feel our side has got aces up the sleeve, and a lot of people are saying William Barr, who was previously questionable, has now flipped and may be quite useful. So that could be that. There's also solar arc Pluto square Jupiter. Again, there's this activation of Jupiter, which leads me to believe that she probably will negotiate something. I think in the public perception now, there's a big desire for justice and retribution, and for someone to pay for this, and someone's going to have to pay. So she'll need to be seen to pay, but maybe what they'll do is put her in prison for a few years, because her chart certainly indicates a dramatic lifestyle shift, so she will be in prison in some way, but maybe there'll be an appeal, and later on she'll be let out on appeal when no one's looking, when people have moved on, when the news stories have moved on and people aren't so incensed. People ask, will other heads roll, like Leslie Wexner? I don't think there's any need for his head to roll. He's very, very old. He's not really a person who's massively in the public consciousness. The other person who's going to have to experience some form of retribution is Andrew, because it's him and her that are mainly the key focus of the public. Now, while those of us initiated know there's a vast web connected to numerous people from the, there's allegations about Dershowitz, allegations about the Clintons, allegations about all sorts of people. We know it. We know all those people who were on the island, from Blair to Mandelson to whoever. So there's lots more involved. But because of Filthy Rich, it was mainly concentrated on her and Andrew. So those are going to be the two people that, for the sake of justice to be done in the public's eye and for the heat to go out of the story from the media's point of view, those are the ones who are going to have to carry the can to a certain degree. And I do believe the higher-ups will remain protected. So I think she will suffer some sort of consequence, but then afterwards, probably when no one's looking, resume her some sort of life. It remains a big question of how Andrew will pay for this, because I certainly strongly feel that he is going to as well. So she also has got solar arc Jupiter square Neptune, which her father had. That's an aspect he had, right? Just having a look there. Yes, there's Jupiter square Neptune, but her father had that aspect, So we say, like father, like daughter. So the aspect of Pluto to Jupiter was also shared by Jeffry Epstein, who had an aspect of Uranus to Jupiter. So there's quite a few similarities in the planets that have been triggered in their charts, bearing in mind what's happened to them. And I suppose there's similarities in terms of the charges they face are fairly similar. They've been incarcerated. It's a massive lifestyle drop for them, a massive unpleasantness for them. But I do feel the outcome will be different. I don't think Ghislaine is going to be topped or suddenly commit suicide or suddenly get coronavirus. I think justice will be seen to be done in some sort of way, but obviously those of us who are more knowledgeable about this, well, it's going to take a lot more than that to satisfy us. So there will be a longer discussion on a live with lots more facts and details, but that's to satisfy the chart reading side of it. Hope you all enjoyed it, and see you soon.